I banned my stepbrother from speaking at my event, and he lost it. Every time my stepbrother got a microphone, he turned me into a joke. So when my biggest event came around, I made one rule: he wasn't allowed to speak. That's when the real meltdown started. I'm posting here because what started as one decision has turned into a chain reaction I didn't see coming. And now I'm being treated like I deliberately set off something explosive instead of trying to protect one night that actually mattered to me. This wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a birthday. It wasn't casual. It was a recognition dinner I organized for myself after hitting a professional milestone that took years to reach. Years of grinding, failing quietly, starting over, working late, losing weekends, and biting my tongue when people assumed I'd never get there. I planned it carefully. Limited guest list, structured timeline, no surprises. I wanted it clean and respectful. I invited close family, a few colleagues, and 2 people who were directly involved in helping me reach this point. My stepbrother has never respected moments like that. His thing isn't playful teasing. It's control. He waits until there's an audience, then reshapes the room so he's the storyteller and I'm the material. He doesn't mock everyone. He doesn't spread it evenly. He focuses on me. Always has. He'll smile while doing it, tilt his head, put on that confused tone if someone looks uncomfortable, then throw out the classic "I'm joking" like it absolves everything that came before it. If I react, I'm sensitive. If I don't, the joke gets sharper next time. I've watched him do this at family gatherings, casual dinners, even moments that weren't his to take. He'll bring up old failures, private insecurities, or things I trusted him with years ago and frame them as funny anecdotes. People laugh because it's easier than interrupting. Then later I get told he didn't mean anything by it. I didn't want that anywhere near this night. Weeks before the dinner, I told him directly that there wouldn't be an open mic. No surprise speeches. No off-the-cuff comments. I explained that the schedule was tight and the tone mattered to me. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't raise my voice. I just said no. That's when everything shifted. At first, he acted like it was nothing. Shrugged. Said, "Your event, your rules." Then the comments started happening around me instead of to me. I'd hear later that he told relatives I was being weird about it, that I was acting important, that I was probably scared he'd say something true. He never said this to my face at first. He let it travel. When I finally confronted him, he laughed and told me I was paranoid. Said I was imagining disrespect because I can't take a joke. Then he added, "Relax. I won't embarrass you. Unless you embarrass yourself first." That snapped something in me. I told him straight that he wasn't touching the microphone, that this wasn't about jokes, that this was about him turning every moment I have into a performance for himself. He rolled his eyes and said I was on a power trip, asked when I got so controlling, told me success was already making me unbearable. I told him control is what he does when he hijacks attention that doesn't belong to him. I told him confidence doesn't require stepping on someone else's throat to stand upright. That turned into yelling, real yelling, not playful, not joking. He called me insecure, bitter, and small. I told him he's only loud because silence would expose him. He told me everyone laughs at him. I told him they laugh because he trained them to, not because he's clever. After that, he stopped arguing directly and started working angles. My phone lit up with messages from family members telling me to just let it go, that he was hurt, that he felt excluded, that I was creating tension. I explained the same thing over and over. He was invited. He just wasn't being handed a stage. Somehow that translated into me attacking him. He sent me a long message accusing me of erasing his role in my life, claiming he'd supported me for years, saying I was punishing him for caring. I responded by listing specific moments where his support looked a lot like humiliation. He replied with, "See, you keep score. That's why people can't be close to you." That one stung, and he knew it would. Closer to the event, I found out he'd reached out to one of the attendees behind my back, framing it like he wanted to honor me with a few words. When I shut that down, he finally snapped outright, accused me of being afraid of him, said I was threatened by his confidence, said his jokes only hit because they're true. I told him truth doesn't need applause and humiliation isn't honesty. By the time the dinner actually happened, I was already braced for impact. Everything was going according to plan until he stood up anyway. No microphone, just his voice. He started talking like he was giving a compliment, then pivoted into a story from my past that had nothing to do with the night. I stood up immediately and told him to sit down. He said he was almost done. I told him he was done now. He called me uptight. I called him disrespectful. He said I was proving his point. I told him the only point he ever proves is that he can't stand not being the center of attention. People stared. Someone tried to intervene. Someone else laughed nervously. He sat down furious. After that, the night continued, but the damage didn't stop there. Since then, I've been told I humiliated him, that I should have let him finish and addressed it later, that I escalated things, that I overreacted. When I pushed back, voices got raised again. I was called dramatic. I told them drama requires an audience, and they'd been complicit for years. That didn't go over well. He's since messaged me accusing me of changing, of becoming arrogant, of trying to control how people see him. I told him I don't need to control anything when he's the one showing exactly who he is. Update 1. He didn't argue with me directly at first, which honestly should have been my warning sign. Instead of pushing back to my face, he went quiet in that deliberate way he does when he's setting something up. Conversations with him got short, polite, almost agreeable. I thought, for about a day, that maybe he'd actually accepted the boundary. Then the side comments started reaching me. A relative asked why I was being so intense about one night. Another casually joked that I must be feeling myself lately. Someone else asked, half laughing, if I was worried about my past coming up. None of them sounded angry. They sounded coached, like they were repeating lines they didn't fully understand. I asked where that was coming from. That's when I found out he'd been talking, quietly, selectively, framing it like concern instead of complaint, telling people I was being weirdly controlling about the event, that I was acting important all of a sudden, that I was nervous he'd say something true if he got the mic. Not insults, implications, the kind that stick without sounding aggressive. When I confronted him about it, he laughed like I'd just told a bad joke. He said I was paranoid, said I was inventing disrespect because I can't take a joke. Then he smirked and added, "Relax, I won't embarrass you, unless you embarrass yourself first." Something in my chest snapped at that. I told him, very clearly, that he was not touching the microphone, that there was no version of this night where he gets to perform, that this wasn't negotiable. He rolled his eyes so hard it felt theatrical and said, "Wow, power trip much?" I told him it wasn't power, it was boundaries. He laughed again, louder this time, and said boundaries were just excuses people use when they're insecure and afraid of being exposed. I told him insecurity wasn't standing up for myself. Insecurity was needing an audience to feel tall. That's when he stopped pretending to be amused. His tone flipped fast. He said I'd changed, said I used to be more fun before I started thinking I was better than everyone. He accused me of rewriting history to make him the villain. I told him he didn't need my help doing that. He said I was bitter. I told him he was threatened by silence because without noise he doesn't know who he is. We were both raising our voices by then, not screaming yet, but sharp, cutting. He accused me of trying to control how people see him. I told him he should worry less about optics and more about why so many of his jokes require me to be smaller for him to feel big. He told me everyone laughs at him. I told him people laugh because it's easier than stopping him. That's when he snapped back that I've always been jealous of him, that I resent how easily people gravitate toward him, that this whole thing was just me trying to punish him for being likable. I laughed in his face, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I told him likable people don't need to humiliate someone else to hold attention. I told him charisma doesn't look like targeting the same person for years and calling it humor. He called me exhausting, said no one could talk to me without walking on eggshells. I told him that if honesty feels like eggshells, maybe he should stop throwing stones. After that, he stormed off and immediately went back to doing what he does best, talking around me instead of to me. I started getting screenshots from people who'd seen his posts. Nothing explicit. Vague quotes about boundaries being used as weapons. Stories about family who can't handle truth. Messages framed like jokes, but aimed straight at me. When I called him out on it, he claimed I was projecting and said if the shoe fit, that wasn't his problem. By the end of the week, the narrative was already shifting. I wasn't someone setting a limit anymore. I was difficult, rigid, on a power trip, and every time someone confronted me about it, he played innocent and said, "I don't know why he's taking this so personally." He knew exactly why. Update 2. The pressure campaign ramped up fast enough that it felt coordinated. It wasn't one conversation. It was dozens of small ones, spread out, timed just far enough apart that I couldn't catch my breath. A call here, a message there, just checking in. That somehow turned into a lecture. My parent told me I was creating tension where there didn't need to be any. Not angrily, calmly, disappointed. The kind of tone that implies you're the problem without ever saying it out loud. My step-parent followed up with how hurt my stepbrother was, how excluded he felt, how this was damaging family unity. I was reminded repeatedly that he's just like that and that I've always known how he jokes. I lost count of how many times I was told to be the bigger person. Every time I tried to explain, I kept it simple. I wasn't banning him from the event. He was invited. He would be seated. He would be acknowledged. I just didn't want him performing. I didn't want a microphone turned into a weapon pointed at me. That distinction didn't matter to anyone else. else. They kept reframing it as punishment, as control, as ego, as me flexing authority over a family gathering. I corrected them every time. I said this was my event, my milestone, my planning, that I'd spent years getting here, and I wanted one night where I didn't have to brace myself for a punchline. That's when the narrative shifted again. I started hearing that I was holding grudges, that I was dragging up old stuff, that I couldn't let things go. I was told I was making everyone uncomfortable by keeping score. That phrase showed up so often it felt scripted. Then he messaged me. It wasn't short. It wasn't angry. It was long and polished and written to sound reasonable. He said I was rewriting history. He said he'd supported me my whole life, that he'd defended me when others didn't, that he'd always been there, and that this was how I was repaying him, by silencing him and treating him like a liability. He said I was punishing him for being himself. I read it 3 times before responding. When I replied, I didn't insult him. I didn't yell. I didn't exaggerate. I listed 3 specific events, dates, context, what he'd said, who was there, moments where he'd publicly humiliated me, and then laughed when I reacted. I didn't editorialize. I didn't add commentary, just facts. His response came back almost immediately. See, you keep score. That's your problem. That did it. I told him if he didn't like the record, he shouldn't have made so many entries. That's when his tone flipped. He said I was obsessed, that I was living in the past, that normal people don't catalog interactions like this. He accused me of weaponizing memory to justify my insecurity. I told him normal people don't need to pretend humiliation is affection. He said I was exhausting to talk to. I told him it must be tiring pretending accountability is abuse. That's when the messages stopped being just between us. I started seeing vague posts about family members who can't handle being told the truth. Stories about people who confuse boundaries with control. Nothing naming me directly, but clear enough that people who knew us understood exactly who he meant. I got messages asking if everything was okay. Some sympathetic, some probing, some clearly fishing for confirmation of whatever version he'd fed them. When I confronted him about the posts, he claimed they weren't about me. Said I was making everything about myself. Said I was proving his point by reacting. I snapped back that if he didn't want people to think it was about me, maybe he should stop describing situations that only involve me. He sent a thumbs up. That was it. Update 3. He tried a different angle this week, and it was slicker than the last 2. I didn't find out from him. I found out because one of the mentors attending the dinner reached out to me directly. The message was polite, slightly awkward, and clearly written by someone trying not to step in a family mess. They said my stepbrother had contacted them, talked about how proud he was of me, and asked if there might be a moment during the evening where he could say a few words to honor my achievement. The mentor asked me if that was something I wanted. That's when I realized he decided to bypass me completely. I told the mentor no. I thanked them for checking with me first. They apologized and said they'd assumed he'd already cleared it with me. I said he hadn't. I sat on that for a few hours before confronting him, mostly because I wanted to be sure I didn't explode immediately. That didn't work. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. When I asked him why he was contacting people I'd invited instead of speaking to me, he didn't even pretend to be confused. He snapped back that I was gatekeeping my own praise, that I was afraid of him, that I didn't want anyone else to see me reflected through someone more confident. I told him confidence doesn't require permission to override someone else's event. He laughed and said people only laughed at his jokes because they were true. That hit something raw. I told him people laughed because it was easier than calling him out and watching him spiral. I told him they laughed because they didn't want to deal with the sulk that comes afterward when he doesn't get validation. I told him laughter wasn't respect, and he knew it. He called me bitter. Said I was angry that he was naturally charismatic while I had to earn approval. Said this whole thing was about my jealousy, not his behavior. I told him he was predictable, that every time someone shuts him down, he turns it into a story about being censored by fragile people, that he couldn't stand not being the loudest voice in the room. That's when the conversation stopped being passive-aggressive and started being loud. He raised his voice first. Said I was humiliating him by treating him like a liability. Said I was acting superior because I finally had an audience that wasn't family. Said I'd always hated that people liked him more. I yelled back that people didn't like him more. They were just more afraid of pushing back. I told him he mistook tolerance for admiration and that it was embarrassing to watch him cling to it. He accused me of rewriting his intentions. I accused him of rewriting my entire personality to avoid accountability. He said I was overreacting. I said he was overstepping. Voices were raised enough that someone else in the house asked what was going on. He told told him I was losing it over nothing. I corrected him immediately and said I was losing patience with being undermined. That's when he changed tactics again. He went quiet, calm, smiling in that way that always means he's about to say something worse. Fine, he said. Don't worry. I'll behave. The way he said it wasn't reassuring. It sounded like a threat wrapped in sarcasm. I told him I didn't trust promises from someone who treats other people's milestones like open stages. I told him that behavior isn't something you turn on and off when it's convenient. I told him trust isn't built in the week before an event after months of pressure and insults. He rolled his eyes and said I was exhausting. Said this was why people walk on eggshells around me. Said I was ruining my own celebration by obsessing over control. I told him I wasn't obsessing. I was responding, and that if he hadn't spent years proving exactly how he behaves with a microphone, we wouldn't be here. He walked away after that, muttering something about how I'd regret this and how people were already talking. Later that night, I got another message from a relative asking why I was being so harsh with him when he was just trying to be supportive. I realized then that he'd already started telling his version of that conversation. Update 4. The night of the event finally arrived, and I went into it already exhausted. Not physically, mentally. Every conversation over the past month had been a negotiation, a warning, or a low-grade threat disguised as concern. I triple-checked everything I could control. I'd spoken to the coordinator again that afternoon. I'd spoken to staff. I'd made it clear there were no open remarks, no surprise moments, no microphone handoffs. Everyone nodded. Everyone assured me it was handled. I should have known better than to think that would stop him. The beginning of the night went exactly how I planned. Structured, calm. People were seated, food was served, scheduled speakers spoke. It felt right. For the first time in weeks, I started to unclench. I remember thinking, briefly, that maybe he'd actually decided to back off. Then, halfway through, he stood up. No microphone, no announcement, just the scrape of his chair and the sudden awareness of movement in a room that had been settled. At first, people assumed it was normal. Someone excusing themselves, someone going to the restroom. Instead, he cleared his throat and started talking anyway, loud enough to carry. He opened with compliments. How proud he was, how hard I'd worked, how he'd seen the journey up close. A few people smiled, a few nodded. It was just plausible enough that interrupting him immediately would have looked rude. Then he pivoted. He brought up a failure from my past that had absolutely nothing to do with the night. Something years old, something personal. He framed it as a funny anecdote about where I started and called it character development. He used that same tone he always does, the one that pretends it's affectionate while sharpening the blade. People laughed, not big laughter, that tight, uncomfortable kind where no one knows what else to do. I felt heat rush to my face. I remember thinking very clearly that this was exactly why I said no. I stood up. My chair made a noise. Heads turned. His eyes flicked to me, and I could see the flash of satisfaction before he masked it. I cut him off out loud. No polite signal, no subtle cue. I told him to sit down. He smirked and said, "Relax. I'm almost done." That did something to me. The casual dismissal, the assumption that he was still in control. I said, louder, "You're done now." The room went quiet enough that I could hear someone set their glass down. He called me uptight, said I couldn't take a joke, said I was proving his point in real time. He actually laughed while saying it, like the room was backing him up. I told him he was disrespectful. I told him I had been clear. I told him he ignored every boundary I set because he thought embarrassment was entertainment. He said I was embarrassing myself, that everyone could see it, that I was making a scene. I told him the only point he ever proves is that he doesn't know when to shut up. That landed hard. The silence after that was heavy and absolute. No nervous laughter this time. No shifting. Just people staring at their plates or straight ahead, pretending not to witness a family fracture in real time. He stood there for a second like he might argue more. His face was red. His jaw was tight. Then he dropped back into his chair so hard it rattled. He didn't say another word for the rest of the night. Update 5. The backlash didn't creep in. It slammed into me. By the next morning, I had messages waiting before I'd even finished my coffee. Not checking in. Not asking what happened. Statements. Accusations. Versions of the night that somehow had nothing to do with what actually occurred. My stepbrother went first. He didn't message me directly. He talked around me. I found out through someone else who forwarded me a screenshot with no commentary. Just the image and a wow underneath it. He told people I publicly embarrassed him, that I humiliated him in front of professionals, that I lost control because I can't handle being reminded of my flaws. He framed it like he'd tried to do something kind and I'd exploded out of nowhere. He called it a pattern. That word came up a lot. Then the relatives chimed in, one by one. Private messages, voice notes, missed calls I didn't return. They said I should have let him finish, that I escalated things unnecessarily, that I made it awkward for everyone, that I should have handled it after instead of making a scene. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering anyone. My hands were actually shaking, not because I felt bad, but because I was furious in that quiet, contained way that feels worse than yelling. trolling. I replied to the first message calmly. Just facts. No insults. No tone. They pushed back immediately. They said I was overreacting, that I've always been sensitive, that he doesn't mean it like that everyone knows how he is, that I should have been the bigger person. That's when I lost my temper for the first time in weeks. I didn't scream into the phone, but I typed like I was yelling. Long messages. No softening language. No politeness. I told them they weren't there for me. They were there for him. That they'd shown up to watch him perform and laugh when he aimed it at me. That they'd watched him tear me down for years and called it bonding because it was easier than admitting they liked the show. One of them replied that I was being dramatic. That word again. I told them drama requires an audience, and they'd happily bought tickets. That if they didn't like the ending, they should have stopped applauding the middle. That set them off. I got voice notes after that. Raised voices. People talking over themselves. Telling me I was twisting things. Saying I was rewriting history. Accusing me of holding grudges. One person said I was letting success get to my head and forgetting where I came from. I snapped back that where I came from included being the punchline, and I wasn't interested in revisiting it. Someone else told me I was burning bridges. I told them bridges that only lead back to the same disrespect aren't infrastructure. They're traps. That message got left on read. Meanwhile, my stepbrother finally messaged me directly. It wasn't long, just enough to sting. He said I'd changed, that I used to be cooler, that I used to be able to laugh at myself, that now I was stiff, defensive, arrogant. He said success had made me think I was better than everyone else. I read it 3 times, not because it was confusing, but because it was so on brand it was almost impressive. I replied once. I said success didn't make me arrogant. It just made it harder for him to keep me small. That was it. No follow-up, no explanation. A few minutes later, the message wouldn't send anymore. He blocked me. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel sad. Mostly, I felt braced, like this wasn't over, just changing shape. The messages from others slowed after that, but they didn't stop. Some people went quiet. Some doubled down. A few unfollowed me on Instagram. A couple of vague posts popped up about respect and humility without naming names, which somehow made it worse. I didn't respond to those. I didn't apologize either. Update 6. He unblocked me late at night. No warning. No lead up. Just a notification popping up like nothing had happened. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the preview for a long time. The way you do when you already know the conversation is going to be ugly, but you still feel dragged into it. The message started polite. Too polite. He said he wanted to clear the air. Said there had been misunderstandings. Said things had gotten blown out of proportion. Said his intentions were good. Always had been. And that it hurt him to be painted as some kind of villain. Then he followed it with, "You know I joke because I care." That line flipped something in me. I didn't respond immediately. I paced. I put my phone down. I picked it back up. By the time I typed back, my hands were steady, but my patience was gone. I told him caring doesn't come with a punchline. That affection doesn't involve humiliating someone in front of a room full of people. That if mocking me was his version of love, I was done translating it. He fired back fast. He said I was rewriting his personality to justify being cruel to him. That I'd always known how he was. That I was trying to turn his humor into something ugly because it suited my narrative. He accused me of weaponizing my feelings so I could avoid taking responsibility for my own insecurity. That one stung, and he knew it. I told him cruelty was pretending insults are gifts and getting angry when the wrapping gets ripped off. I told him humor doesn't require collateral damage. I told him if the joke only works when I'm the target, it's not clever, it's lazy. He said I was overanalyzing, that everyone else gets it, that nobody else is this offended, that I've always been thin-skinned and now I'm using boundaries as a buzzword to excuse being hostile. I snapped back that boundaries aren't hostility, they're breaks, and he's been flooring it for years. That just because other people laugh to keep the peace doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. That silence isn't consent. That's when he accused me of trying to control how people see him. He said I embarrassed him on purpose, that I wanted to look powerful, that I was manipulating the situation so he'd come off as the bad guy and I'd get sympathy. He said I'd always needed to be the serious one, the impressive one, and now I was punishing him for not fitting into that image. I told him I didn't have to control anything, that he'd been doing a great job shaping people's opinions all by himself, that standing up for myself didn't erase his actions, it just put them in better lighting. He went quiet for a few minutes, then came back sharper. He said I was exhausting, that every conversation with me turns into a lecture, that I suck the fun out of rooms, that I'm impossible to joke with and even harder to apologize to because I collect grievances like trophies. I didn't soften my response. I told him I was exhausted by him, that I was tired of being expected to absorb his jabs gracefully so he could feel charming, that I was tired of him confusing discomfort with humor and backlash with censorship. I told him I wasn't asking him to change who he is. I was telling him I don't have to stand there while he does it to me. He called me thin-skinned again, said I'd always been this way, just better at hiding it before. Said people walk on eggshells around me now. I told him if eggshells crack when you stop insulting someone, maybe the problem isn't the floor. At that point, the conversation wasn't even about resolution anymore. It was about winning. He kept kept reframing. I kept shutting it down. Every time I named something specific he did, he zoomed out and blamed my personality. Every time I refused that framing, he accused me of attacking his character. It went in circles until he sent one last message saying he didn't recognize me anymore and that I'd turned into someone bitter and cold. I replied that recognizing me was never the goal. Controlling the narrative was. He didn't answer after that. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Then the silence broke, but not from him directly. I started getting messages from people who'd been at the event. Not dramatic ones, short, uncomfortable ones. Stuff like, hey, just checking in. Didn't realize things were that tense. Did you know he's telling a different version of what happened? Apparently, he'd been doing quiet damage control. Not a blow-up, not a rant, just selective conversations. Framing it like concern. Saying he was worried about me. Saying I'd been under a lot of pressure lately. Saying the outburst wasn't like me. That part pissed me off more than anything else. I wasn't unhinged. I wasn't spiraling. I hadn't lost control. I'd said no, clearly, repeatedly, and publicly enforced it when he ignored me. Watching him rebrand that his instability was almost impressive. Almost. Then came the final message. He didn't unblock me to apologize. He unblocked me to inform me. He said he was done trying. Said he was tired of being villainized. Said he decided to take space for his own well-being. He said maybe someday I'd understand how hurtful I'd been. He said he hoped I'd find peace. It read like a closing statement, like he wanted the last word wrapped in calm language so he could walk away feeling reasonable. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't relitigate anything. I told him he was free to take all the space he needed. That I wasn't asking for reconciliation. That I wasn't interested in being reinterpreted into someone smaller so he could feel comfortable. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. Just finished. That was it. No reply came back. After that, things settled in an odd way. Not quietly, but steadily. Some people stopped reaching out altogether. Others adjusted their tone. A few apologized without directly saying the word apology. Nobody tried to push him back into my orbit. The events I'm involved with now don't include him. Not because of a ban. Because no one invites him to speak anymore. I still hear his name occasionally. Usually followed by an awkward pause. Usually followed by someone changing the subject. There was no dramatic fallout. No explosive confrontation. No public reckoning. Just a slow recalibration where people remembered what it felt like when the jokes landed wrong. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't post a statement. I didn't need to. The last thing I heard through the grapevine was that he tells people we drifted apart. That's fine. The end. Your stepbrother didn't want to toast you. He wanted to roast you at your own dinner. Spent weeks gaslighting family, sneaking around your guests, then stood up uninvited to drop funny bombs about your past failures. You shut it down mid-sentence, and suddenly you're the villain for making a scene. Classic narcissist move. When denied the stage, he cried victim and sent the flying monkeys. Family guilting you with he's just like that and be the bigger person are professional enablers who loved the free entertainment as long as you were the punchline. Verdict. NTA. You protected your one night after years of grind. He ignored every boundary. You enforced it. End of story. Enjoy your win without the emotional vampire. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.